They never tell you when they are leaving. One moment they are there, holding your world together with their patience, their kindness, their love, and the next moment they are gone. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. For those left behind, it feels like abandonment. But for the empath, it is survival. Carl Jung believed the soul carries truths long before the conscious mind can accept them. An empath's soul knows when it has given too much, carried too much, tolerated too much. And though their heart resists, though they want to stay, though they want to believe in change, there comes a day when the unconscious erupts and whispers a truth they can no longer ignore. You cannot stay here without losing yourself. If you are an empath, you know this truth. You know what it feels like to give chance after chance. To forgive betrayals that cut deep. To explain your pain to someone who never truly listens. To bend until you are breaking. You know how it feels to pour yourself into someone who only knows how to take, and then to question yourself as though you were the problem. For so long, you make excuses. They had a hard past. They are under stress. They didn't mean it. And you believe, against all evidence, that if you just keep loving harder, they will finally see you. But love does not blind the empath forever. There is a moment, a quiet, invisible moment, when everything shifts. It is not rage. It is not revenge. It is clarity. A kind of clarity so sharp it hurts. You suddenly see the relationship for what it truly is. You see the manipulation, the disrespect, the lack of care. You see how much of yourself you have abandoned for the sake of keeping someone else whole. And you realize you cannot do it anymore. Jung described this moment as an eruption of the shadow, the unconscious self demanding to be heard. For the empath, this is when their soul rises up and says enough. Enough carrying both sides of the relationship. Enough explaining pain that was never acknowledged. Enough trying to heal someone who never wanted to heal. Enough giving love where there is only control. And in that moment, something changes forever. The empath does not announce this decision. They do not scream, they do not warn, they do not beg. Because by the time they reach this point, they have already screamed silently 1,000 times. Their tears were warnings. Their fading laughter was a warning. Their exhaustion was a warning. They gave every signal, every chance, every opportunity, and it was ignored. So when they leave, they do not explain. They simply go. To the outside world, it looks sudden. But inside the empath, it is years in the making. Each small betrayal, each careless word, each dismissal carved its way into their heart. They carried it quietly, hoping their love would be enough to heal it. But the weight became unbearable. And when the moment of clarity came, it was not a choice, it was the only way to survive. What makes this departure so haunting is its finality. Others may walk away and come back, repeat the cycle, reopen the wounds. But not the empath. Once they have seen the truth, they cannot unsee it. Once they have chosen themselves, they cannot unchoose themselves. Once they have closed the door, they never open it again. Because to go back would mean betraying their own soul, and they have already done that too many times for too long. And here is the deepest truth: the empath's silence is not cruelty. It is grief. It is mourning the love that could have been but never was. It is the ache of realizing that their giving heart was wasted on someone who could not receive it. It is the sorrow of finally choosing themselves when they wanted nothing more than to be chosen by someone else. Their silence is not heartlessness. It is the sound of a soul saving itself. For those who once had their love, the absence is crushing. They thought the empath's patience would last forever. They thought the apologies would always be accepted. They thought the second chances would never run out. They mistook kindness for weakness. And when the empath leaves, they finally realize that love was rare. That devotion was priceless. That presence will not return. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For the empath, leaving is making the unconscious conscious. It is realizing that fate will keep repeating as long as they stay in cycles of pain. And walking away is not just an ending, it is the beginning of becoming whole again. This is why empaths leave without warning. Because staying became unbearable. Because explaining became useless. Because giving became empty. And once they leave, they never return. Not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much, for too long, until there was nothing left to give. When an empath finally walks away, the world assumes they have simply closed the door and moved on. But the truth is far more complex, far more painful, and far more transformative. Leaving is only the first step. What follows is the long, silent process of healing, of reclaiming pieces of themselves they gave away, of forgiving themselves for tolerating so much, and of rebuilding a life that no longer revolves around someone else's chaos. For the empath, departure is never easy. They do not walk away lightly. They walk away carrying the invisible scars of years of sacrifice, and those scars do not fade overnight. In fact, the first stage after leaving is often one of quiet devastation. Because even though they know they made the right choice, even though clarity has freed them, their heart still grieves. Grieves the dream they tried to build. Grieves the person they thought the other could become. Grieves the version of themselves who believed love could fix everything. Carl Jung often reminded us that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. This is the paradox empaths live through after they leave. The act of walking away brings them back to life, but it also tears open every wound they had ignored. They begin to feel the weight of all the years they gave without receiving. The loneliness of all the nights they cried themselves to sleep. The exhaustion of carrying love like a burden. Now, with the noise of the relationship gone, those buried emotions rise to the surface, and it is overwhelming. This is why people mistake the empath's silence for coldness. It is not coldness. It is survival. Because in the quiet, the empath is finally processing everything they endured. They are not plotting revenge. They are not waiting for someone to beg them back. They are stitching themselves together. Piece by piece. Memory by memory. Scar by scar. And this healing is not quick. Empaths feel deeply, and so they must heal deeply. They cannot simply brush off betrayal with shallow affirmations. They cannot replace years of emotional neglect with a single burst of distraction. They must sit with their pain, examine it, and understand it. They must make the unconscious conscious, as Jung explained, so it no longer rules their life in silence. This is what separates empaths from others. They do not just run from pain. They transform it. But this transformation has stages. At first, the empath wrestles with guilt. They ask themselves if they left too soon, if they were too harsh, if they abandoned someone in need. This guilt is not rational, but it is powerful. Because the empath's nature is to care, even when that care is undeserved. So part of healing is learning that choosing yourself is not cruelty. It is sanity. It is survival. Then comes the anger. For so long, the empath buried their anger under patience, under forgiveness, under endless explanations. But once free, the anger rises. Anger at being used. Anger at being unseen. Anger at themselves for ignoring the signs. This anger is not destructive, it is cleansing. It burns away illusions. It lights up the truth: I deserve better. I always deserve better. And then, slowly, there is acceptance. A quiet, steady acceptance that the past cannot change. That the person they loved will not suddenly awaken and give back what was lost. That no apology could ever equal the years of silence, neglect, or control. Acceptance is not instant. It comes like dawn, slowly, quietly, until one day the empath notices the heaviness lifting. This is where rebirth begins. Because when an empath finally begins to heal, something extraordinary happens. The energy they once poured into others, they begin to pour into themselves. They rediscover passions they abandoned. They reconnect with friends they neglected. They notice small joys again, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter, the beauty of being alone without feeling lonely. They begin to taste freedom not as emptiness, but as fullness. Carl Jung believed that the process of individuation, becoming one's true self, is the greatest task of human life. For the empath, leaving without warning is the spark that ignites individuation. They finally turn inward. They finally ask, Who am I when I am not fixing others? Who am I when I am not carrying someone else's burdens? Who am I when I choose me? And the answer is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because they have built so much of their identity around giving that it feels strange to receive. Liberating, because they realize their worth was never tied to how much they could endure. Their worth was never in sacrifice. Their worth was in their being. This is why the empath never returns. Not because they are stubborn. Not because they are unforgiving. But because they have stepped into a new self that cannot fit into the old cage. Going back would mean shrinking again. Going back would mean silencing themselves again. Going back would mean betraying the person they fought so hard to reclaim. And once you have tasted freedom, once you have touched your own wholeness, you cannot trade it for chains, no matter how familiar those chains once felt. For the one left behind, this is unbearable. They cannot understand why the empath is so final. They mistake it for heartlessness. But in truth, the empath's finality is the purest act of love, love directed inward. After years of bleeding for others, they finally protect themselves. And in doing so, they become unbreakable. The empath leaves without warning because every warning was already given and ignored. They never return because their soul has risen too high to crawl back into the shadows. What they rebuild after they leave is not just a life. It is a rebirth. And nothing, no apology, no promise, no plea, can undo that. When an empath steps into the quiet after leaving, the healing that follows is not only emotional, it is spiritual. Something shifts at the core of their being. For years they lived in a cycle of giving, of absorbing pain, of carrying emotions that were never theirs to carry. They were like a mirror, reflecting back the wounds of others, trying to bring light into places where darkness had long taken root. But when they walk away, that mirror shatters. And in the fragments, they finally see themselves. Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that we all carry, the side we deny, suppress, and project onto others. For empaths, their own shadow is often forgotten, because they spend so much time carrying the shadows of everyone else. They learn to comfort, to heal, to forgive, but they neglect their own hidden pain. After leaving, the empath finally turns inward. They face not only the wounds caused by others, but also the parts of themselves they left in silence. Their shadow comes alive, demanding to be seen. And though this is frightening, it is also the key to becoming whole. This is why the empath's journey after walking away is unlike anyone else's. Others may run from their pain, distract themselves, or quickly move on. But empaths cannot. Their sensitivity, which was once exploited, becomes their greatest teacher. They feel everything. They process deeply. They dream vividly. They sense the weight of the unseen. And so their healing is not only a recovery from what was done to them, but a transformation into who they were always meant to be. At first, this depth feels heavy. The silence can feel unbearable. The memories return at night, replaying every manipulation, every betrayal, every moment of being dismissed. But slowly, the empath begins to see that these memories are not chains. They are lessons. They begin to recognize the patterns. The way their kindness was mistaken for weakness, the way their patience was tested again and again, the way their loyalty was taken for granted. And with each realization, they cut another invisible cord that once tied them to the past. In Jung's psychology, there is a concept called individuation, the process of becoming one's authentic self, separate from the mask society places upon us. For empaths, the moment of leaving is the doorway into individuation. They finally remove the mask of the caretaker, the fixer, the self-sacrificing soul who exists only to make others whole. They begin to see themselves not as a reflection of someone else's needs, but as a being of their own. This is liberation. And yet, liberation is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It unfolds in quiet ways. An empath begins to wake up without dread in their chest. They sit in a room alone and realize the silence feels peaceful instead of suffocating. They walk outside and notice the sky, the trees, the warmth of sunlight on their face. These moments seem small, but they are sacred. Because for so long, Their nervous system was trained to live in fight or flight, always bracing for conflict, always waiting for the next storm. Now, at last, they begin to feel safe in their own presence. This shift is invisible to the world, but inside the empath, it feels like rebirth. And as this rebirth unfolds, something else begins to happen. Their energy changes. The empath who once gave without limits now carries a new boundary, a silent power that others can feel even without words. It is not anger. It is not bitterness. It is clarity. And this clarity is magnetic, yet untouchable. Here lies the reason why the empath never returns. Because once this boundary is formed, once this inner transformation takes root, there is no way back. They have tasted what it means to belong to themselves. They have felt the strength of being whole. And no plea, no promise, no apology can compete with that freedom. The ones left behind often cannot understand this. They ask themselves how someone so loving could simply disappear without a final explanation. They search for closure that will never come. They do not realize that every explanation was already given, countless times, in the tears, in the warnings, in the silence. The empath does not leave suddenly. The empath leaves slowly, quietly, and then all at once. By the time they walk out the door, the relationship had already ended long before. And so, when they do not return, it is not cruelty. It is not revenge. It is truth. The truth that they are no longer available to be drained. The truth that they are no longer willing to sacrifice themselves to keep someone else comfortable. The truth that they deserve a life where their love is not taken as an endless resource, but honored as the sacred gift it truly is. Jung believed that within each person lies both light and shadow, both potential and destruction. For empaths, leaving is the moment they finally turn their light toward themselves. And in that act, something extraordinary happens. They stop being the savior of others, and instead become the savior of their own soul. From the outside, it looks like silence. But within, it is the sound of rebirth. From the outside, it looks like absence. But within, it is the presence of a self finally whole. This is why the empath leaves without warning, and why they never return. Because what they have found is too sacred to ever abandon again. When the empath leaves, the world notices something immediately, or rather, it begins to notice gradually, like the slow turning of a shadow across a room. At first, there is confusion. Those who once depended on the empath cannot believe that someone so giving could simply vanish. They search for explanations. They replay every interaction, wondering what went wrong. And yet the empath stays silent. Not out of cruelty, but because words cannot capture the depth of what has been endured. Words cannot explain years of invisible labor, of emotional labor, of soul-deep sacrifice. The absence of an empath is unlike the absence of anyone else. When a typical person leaves, others often fill the space quickly, sometimes without even realizing they are doing it. But when an empath walks away, their absence leaves a vacuum that no one can replicate. Their presence was not loud, but it was profound. Their listening was not performative, but it was transformative. Their care was not conditional, but deeply rooted in the understanding of another soul. And when they are gone, the emptiness is palpable. People feel it in ways they cannot describe, in the sudden lack of emotional resonance, in the strange quiet that fills every room they once touched. Those who once controlled, manipulated, or took the empath for granted begin to sense something they never anticipated: a void. A mirror is gone. The person who always reflected back their needs, absorbed their moods, smoothed over their chaos, no longer exists for them. And in that void, envy rises. Not envy of possessions or status, but envy of freedom. Envy of a soul that can finally breathe, that can finally protect itself, that can finally exist without bending to someone else's world. And this envy is sharp, because the empath's escape is proof that it was possible to live differently, proof that the bonds of control and manipulation were never unbreakable. The empath's silence is their loudest statement. They do not need to explain, they do not need to justify, they do not need to return. Every unanswered call, every unreturned message, every closed door speaks louder than words ever could. For the ones left behind, it becomes a reckoning. They realize too late what was lost. They feel the weight of absence, the depth of giving that was taken for granted, the sacred presence they could not honor while it existed. And there is no redemption, because the empath has already chosen themselves. Jung taught that the human psyche resists growth until it is forced to confront truth. For those who mistreated the empath, the absence becomes that truth. It forces introspection, it forces self-awareness, it forces the recognition that they cannot reclaim what was freely given. And this is why the empath's departure, while quiet, is the most profound form of response. It is not revenge in the conventional sense. It is the power of walking away, intact, whole, and unbroken, while leaving others to grapple with the consequences of their actions. And yet, for the empath, there is no malice. They do not leave to punish. They leave to heal. They leave to protect themselves. And in protecting themselves, they teach the world a lesson that cannot be ignored. The lesson is simple and devastating. Your actions have boundaries, and those boundaries will eventually be honored whether you like it or not. The empath's love cannot be stolen indefinitely. Their kindness cannot be exploited without consequence. Their presence cannot be taken for granted. And once they leave, the full weight of their absence becomes undeniable. This is why empaths never return. Once they have created their boundaries, once they have reclaimed their energy and their light, there is no longer a space for those who drain them. They have stepped out of cycles of toxicity and into a life that honors their value. And those who remain on the outside are left to reckon with the emptiness, the silence, and the haunting reminder of what they lost. In this silence, the empath becomes a paradox, gone, yet more present than ever. Their departure carries a clarity that no argument, no explanation, no apology could ever match. It is both the end and the end of suffering, the beginning of self-possession. And for those who witness it, consciously or unconsciously, it is terrifying, because it reflects their own inability to change, their own complicity, and the truth they refused to face while the empath was still there. And so, the world reacts with confusion, envy, regret, and sometimes desperation. But the empath remains untouched by it. Their heart is no longer in the hands of those who failed to honor it. Their energy is protected, their boundaries are sacred, and their freedom is absolute. And this is the ultimate lesson of the empath's departure, that walking away is not weakness, it is strength, that silence is not indifference, it is power, and that choosing oneself is the highest act of love any human can offer, both to oneself and to the world. The final stage for an empath is unlike anything the world can comprehend. It is not marked by drama, confrontation, or spectacle. It is marked by quiet mastery over one's own life, by a profound reclamation of energy and self. After years of giving, after enduring manipulation, betrayal, and neglect, the empath finally arrives at a place where they exist fully for themselves. And in that existence, they are untouchable. This is the ultimate paradox of the empath. For so long, their sensitivity made them vulnerable. Their compassion made them pray for those who could not understand the depth of their heart. Their patience was mistaken for weakness. Their love was taken for granted. But after leaving, after finally severing ties with toxicity, their sensitivity becomes their power. Their empathy transforms into wisdom. Their quiet presence becomes a shield that no one can breach. They no longer absorb chaos. They no longer bend to fit the needs of others. They are whole, luminous, and free. Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation as the path toward wholeness, the integration of shadow and light, of conscious and unconscious, of the fragmented pieces of the self. For the empath, this final stage is a living example of individuation. Every scar, every tear, every moment of silent endurance has led to a profound self-awareness. They now know their value without needing external validation. They now honor their boundaries without apology. They now walk through the world untethered from those who would diminish their light. The departure that once seemed like absence is now understood as a statement of ultimate clarity. Those who once took for granted the empath's presence are left to wrestle with the reality of what they have lost. The silence becomes deafening. The space left behind is heavy with the weight of unacknowledged love. And in that silence, the empath's strength echoes louder than any words ever could. Their exit is not vengeance, but the purest form of consequence. It is a demonstration that love cannot be forced, care cannot be exploited, and patience has limits. Inside the empath, a profound transformation occurs. The grief that once consumed them becomes a river of insight. The anger that once burned becomes the fuel for self-assertion. The guilt that once shackled them dissolves into self-compassion. They learn to move through life with awareness and intentionality, seeing clearly the patterns of energy and behavior around them, protecting their spirit without resentment, and offering kindness only where it is cherished and returned. And with this transformation comes freedom unlike any other. They no longer tremble at the emotional turbulence of others. They no longer sacrifice themselves to soothe insecurity or control. They live with a calm authority, a quiet confidence that radiates from their very being. People sense it even if they cannot name it, a rare aura that cannot be copied, cannot be coerced, cannot be diminished. It is the essence of an empath who has chosen themselves fully, who has reclaimed the soul that was once fragmented, who has finally learned that their heart is theirs alone to protect. The empath never returns because the world they left behind cannot contain them. The relationships that demanded their energy without reciprocity, the people who mistook love for weakness, the spaces that required self-abandonment, these are no longer suitable for someone who has awakened to their own worth. And the truth is, the empath does not mourn this absence. They mourn what could have been, yes, but they do not long for the past. Their gaze is forward, toward life lived with integrity, depth, and freedom. Jung believed that consciousness grows through confrontation with truth, and the empath's departure is the ultimate confrontation. They face the truth of their relationships, face the truth of their own boundaries, face the truth of their own value. And in doing so, they emerge stronger than anyone who ever underestimated them could imagine. They emerge whole. They emerge luminous. They emerge untouchable. For the ones left behind, the absence of the empath is both haunting and instructive. They feel the void, and in that void, they see clearly what they took for granted, what they failed to honor, what they failed to nurture. And for the empath, there is no turning back. The lessons have been learned. The boundaries have been established. The soul has been reclaimed. They walk through life as a force of quiet power, their footsteps leaving echoes that linger long after they are gone. And this is the essence of their revenge, though it is not revenge in the way the world understands. The empath's final act is not anger, not malice, not punishment. It is self-respect. It is self-preservation. It is the affirmation of their own worth. It is the demonstration that love given without reciprocity is a debt that will never be repaid, and when the empath walks away, that debt remains uncollectible. They leave behind only truth, clarity, and a presence that can never be replaced. The empath's silence is their triumph. Their absence is their power. Their refusal to return is the final act of sacred self-love. And those who witness it, consciously or unconsciously, are forever marked by the lesson: a heart that gives freely, that loves deeply, that heals endlessly, cannot be taken lightly. Once it is broken by neglect, once it is abandoned to preserve itself, it will never surrender again. And so, the empath lives on, healed, whole, radiant, and free. They do not need the approval of those who failed them. They do not need recognition from those who could not understand them. They do not need to justify their departure, explain their absence, or plead for acceptance. They simply exist, and in existing fully, they teach the world the most terrifying truth of all. When an empath awakens to themselves, no one can ever hold them back, and no one can ever replace the love they gave so purely.